Well, the long wait is finally over. The Many Saints of Newark has finally come out after multiple delays. And the reception was mixed. Some fans love it and some absolutely hate it. But even the ones that enjoyed the movie admit that the film has its flaws. The general criticism revolves around the fact that the film feels unfocused. There are three main stories happening in the movie. One revolves around Dickie Moltisanti, Christopher's father who died before the series started. The second revolves around Harold, a gangster trying to make it on his own, independent of any other group. And of course, the final story is about a young Tony Soprano, as he comes of age under the influence of Dickie. However, these storylines don't come together in a meaningful way. It feels almost like two different movies shoved together, which, when you learn the background of what David Chase originally wanted to do, doesn't seem that far off. However, rather than just pick the movie apart and talk about all the continuity elements from the show that the film got wrong, I thought I would do something a little different. Instead, I'm going to go through how I would have written the film if I was in charge of the story. My main goal with this draft is to better connect the story elements into one tight narrative. This reflects what I look for in a film, which is that all the elements revolve around a single idea. In this case, it's exploring Dickie's relationship with the other characters. While the movie did explore him, the other details like the riots and Junior felt superfluous to his character. It just didn't connect. In my version, these events will be directly related to Dickie and his actions. Now, if my title intro wasn't enough of a dead giveaway, this is going to contain spoilers for the Many Saints of Newark. If you haven't seen the movie yet and are planning to, I recommend you come back and watch this after you're done. There, you've been warned. Now, a lot of people have given suggestions like make the film into a mini-series or cut the Harold subplot altogether, but I'm going to operate under three assumptions. 1. It has to be a 2 to 2.5 hour movie. 2. Harold and the Newark riots need to be a central part of the film. And 3. Junior has to kill Dickie. With that in mind, I would restructure the film to not only be more cohesive, but also more closely related to the show. After all, if we're making a sequel to The Sopranos, it only makes sense that we would want to focus on the characters that we are already familiar with. While I don't want the film to just be references to the show, I do think it's important to connect it to the themes and character arcs that we watched in the show. So, with all that said, here's how I would fix The Many Saints of Newark. Now, before we get started, let me preface this by saying that I'm not writing a whole script. There's no written dialogue, and a lot of the elements would obviously need to be fleshed out in a final draft. This is just a general outline of the film's structure and how each of the elements connects back to the overall theme of the picture. I also don't believe that my version is perfect. It's just a starting point for a film that more closely reflects what I wanted out of this movie personally. And I am fully prepared for you to tell me that my version sucks and that I'm a hack. Hell, you're probably right. But if you're angry at me for cutting a scene you liked, or not including a reference to your favorite joke from The Sopranos, this might not be the film for you. This is more of a thinking man's picture. Maybe Cleaver is more your style.
I didn't ask you what you fucking think. Motherfucking son of a...
I also don't have storyboards or anything for this, so instead I'm going to use the closest pictures and clips that I can find, but you're gonna need to use your imagination for some of this. Now, we open the film with a title sequence of Dickie in prison. It might seem a little cliche to start with a new character getting out of prison, but it works for two reasons. One, this way Dickie can be a fish out of water, and we can explain the situation he's walking into without having to rely on narration. I know a lot of people liked the Christopher narration in the movie, but I did not. The show always dealt with the supernatural, but it was always subtle and with other possible explanations. But apparently, hell is real, and Christopher is there waiting to constantly remind us that Tony killed him. And aside from the pilot and that one weird scene in season 6, the show didn't use narration. So we're cutting that. Sorry.
But he's a ghost? I don't know.
Ghostbusters, another fucking money machine.
And number 2, we need to set up the possibility that Dickie is killed by Jilly Ruffalo. Because the biggest mystery about Dickie from the show is if Tony is lying about his death. Christopher admits it's a possibility, so we need to address it here. Now, I am retconning the story a little bit to show that Dickie takes Jilly's eye out in prison, when in the show Tony says he was on parole when he did that, but we can just chalk that up to faulty memory. This won't be the only slight change to continuity, but that was never really a priority for David Chase anyway, so I think it's fine. Dickie is then released from prison, and he's picked up by Junior. Since we're gonna keep the ending where Junior kills Dickie, we need to establish more of a relationship between the two. Junior warns Dickie that he always acts without thinking, and one day it's gonna get him killed. Dickie can then make a joke about Junior being Johnny's errand boy, sowing the seeds of conflict that will lead to Junior killing him. After all, I can believe that Junior would kill him because he was embarrassed. In the show, he tries to kill Tony in part because Tony laughs at him about going down on a girl.
Cunnilingus and psychiatry brought us to this.
But we need more than just one incident of Dickie laughing at him. We're going to establish the conflict between them as more than just this, but we'll touch on that soon. As they drive through Newark, Dickie can see that the city has changed since he was last there. Junior explains that the city is on a knife's edge, and that racial tension between whites and blacks has never been higher. This is important because one of the problems of the movie was that it didn't really explain why the riots happened, or how it connected to the main characters. It's just something that happens in the background, and then they move on. We're gonna fix that by giving the characters a direct role in the riots, and our way to do that is through Anthony Imperiali. Imperiali was a real-life politician and a white nationalist, who was a big part of the riots. He's mentioned in season 4 of the show.
Maurice, were you around for Anthony Imperiali, the White Knight?
Around? Who do you think he was fighting against?
Italian pride. Keep Newark white.
Aspiring Klansmen, some of those boys.
As they drive through Newark, they see a rally being led by Imperiali. The crowd is holding up signs and chanting, "Keep Newark white." In this version, Imperiali will not only serve as a villainous character, but he'll also be the bridge to get the mobsters involved with the riots. Now, there will be things in this version that are not historically accurate. I'll be changing timeline and details to make it fit the narrative. But it will be in the spirit of what happened, and keeping with the continuity of the show. Junior takes Dickie home, and he's greeted by a surprise party. It's very similar to the one we see with Johnny Boy in the film, though it's more important in this case since it revolves around our main character. We'll be introduced to all the family, Johnny Boy is jovial, Livia is crazy, and this will serve as the first interactions we get with Dickie and Tony. Since Dickie was away, he wouldn't have had a relationship with Tony yet. This is where their friendship will first start. But right now, Tony is closer with Junior as they play ball together all the time. This will be an important detail later. We're also introduced to Dickie's wife, Joanne. In my version, we won't include Josephina. I'd rather use the time to explore Joanne, a character we already know from the show, and one that more directly relates to Christopher. After the party, she and Dickie have sex. They're excited about the future and talking about all their plans. Dickie wants to have a bunch of kids, paralleling Christopher's relationship with Adriana. And just like that relationship, this one is going to go downhill quickly. The next day, Dickie goes to the pork store, and there he meets with the guys. We'll see Paulie, a young pussy, maybe Richie Aprile, and even Feech LaManna. But no Silvio. We're keeping him Tony's age like he's supposed to be from the show. And more importantly, we're introducing a new character, Ercole DeMeo, the boss of the family, played by Ray Liotta. Now, this might be controversial, but I wasn't a fan of the dual role of Hollywood Dick and Sally Moltisanti that Liotta played in the film. It just felt distracting and it didn't culminate in a meaningful way for me. So instead, we're going to use that time to explore the original boss of the family. In the show, the Soprano crew is actually the DeMeo crew. Old Man DeMeo was the boss of the family, but he was arrested and Jackie Sr. took over as acting boss before the first episode. Here we finally get a chance to explore the man, and it gives more structure to the New Jersey crew. DeMeo welcomes Dickie back and serves as a bit of a father figure to Dickie in the film. He tells him he has a job for him. They've been contacted by Imperiale, who wants their help with something. He tells Dickie to go down to Imperiale's office and talk with him. He mentions they have history with Imperiale, which might not be factually accurate, but it gives more of a connection to the characters in the film. We then cut to an African American rally protesting against Imperiale and their treatment. The rally is being led by the pastor we meet in Season 2. After all, we saw him and his son preaching against racism in the construction site. It would only make sense that they've been involved with politics for a really long time. Plus, again, this gives more of a connection to existing characters and the show. In the crowd, we see a young Harold, and we also see a young Maurice Tiffin. Now, we learn in Season 4 that Maurice was there that summer during the riots.
In the summer of '67, we're both home on break. I'm interning at the state legislature, and what were you doing?
East Newark Food Co-op.
Right. But, come July...
The Newark riots.
What a fucking summer that was.
Later that year, Maurice and I helped organize one of the first black voting drives.
Taking that, I'm going to make him a central character to the African American side of the story. Again, it's going to give it more of a connection to the show, and it will also give a more balanced perspective to the African American perspective. In the movie, all we got was Harold's point of view, but in this version, we'll get different viewpoints on how different African Americans viewed the riots. Maurice in this version is determined to use political activism to solve their problems, which clashes with Harold's desire for violence and action. We then cut with Dickie going to meet with Imperiale in his office. And here we're going to be introduced to another familiar character, Ronald Zellman. Zellman said he was interning with the state legislature, and though I don't think technically Imperiale was with the state legislature at this time, we can stretch it to say that Zellman was actually interning for Imperiale. Again, this is all about connecting everything back to the characters that we already know, and plus, having Zellman there gives us more of an insight into why these things are happening politically. Imperiale tells Dickie that he's organizing a group called the North Ward First Aid Squad, which he says is meant to protect whites in troubled neighborhoods. In reality, this is a white nationalist militia group that opposes racial integration in the city. Again, this is all straight from history, and I'm surprised Chase didn't use it in the movie. It's perfect for the conflict he's trying to portray. Again, we might be stretching things here and there, and it might all be not technically 100% true, but I do think it fits into the spirit of the history. Imperiale wants the mob to be his muscle, and he's willing to pay them. He says he can get tax money diverted to them through the mayor's office. Now this is going to be an important plot point later on, so hold on to it. Dickie agrees to help. We then cut to a bar where Zellman meets with Maurice and Harold. He warns them that the mafia is now involved and things are going to start to get dangerous. Harold says that they should get guns to defend themselves, but Maurice wants to use more peaceful methods. Harold agrees for now. The next day, however, Imperiale's militia group is harassing a group of African Americans in a mixed neighborhood. Harold is part of this group, and things are about to get violent when Dickie shows up and manages to calm everyone down. This establishes that Dickie isn't evil or racist, he's just reckless and doesn't think before he acts. And this is going to be important soon. Later, the cops beat a black cab driver, which sets the people off. This is what happened in real life and in the movie, and it leads to a mass protest outside of City Hall. On one side you have African Americans with Maurice and Harold. On the other side you have whites, with Imperiale's supporters and the mob. We'll also see a young Barry Haydu when he was a beat cop. Again, we need to connect this back to the mystery of the show. The tension is at a boiling point. Both sides are throwing insults at each other. Suddenly someone throws something. Then people start throwing more. Rocks, bottles. Dickie gets hit in the head. Angry and disoriented, he pulls out his gun. Without even thinking, he shoots into the crowd. And just like that, the dam breaks. Riots. People are brawling in the street, buildings are on fire, the cops are trying to separate the crowd, but it's chaos. Eventually, the National Guard roll in with tanks and tear gas. The guys manage to pull Dickie out of there, and they escape. And Tony watches all of this from his bedroom window. In the chaos, Harold is clutching the body of his friend. Dickie's bullet killed him, though Harold couldn't see who it was that shot him. As he sees the city burn around him, he realizes that the only way to protect himself and his loved ones is through money and violence. And he swears he will get revenge on the man that killed his friend. End of Act 1. We then jump forward a number of years. Now, there is a problem in the story with Tony's age. He's supposed to be 8 years old when the riots happen, but he looks like he's around 16 when Christopher is born, though he's only supposed to be 10 years older than him in the show. Now, the show wasn't always good about age. Hugh, for example, is too young to have fought in World War II if he was 75 in 2004. So I'm operating with the idea that age is flexible to play around with. So we're going to jump forward 5 years. Tony is 16 now, and Christopher is a toddler. We open with Tony playing football. All of his family is gathered there to watch him. Johnny Boy, Junior, Livia, and Dickie. Though the show never states what position Tony played, based on Junior's comment about small hands, it makes me think that he was handling the ball in some way. In this game, he goes for a catch, but fumbles and drops the ball. After the game, Tony's family goes to congratulate him anyway. Junior in particular wants to talk to Tony, but he's only interested in Dickie's opinion. Again, this is going to mirror interactions that we saw in the show, particularly when Junior gets pissed off when he's ignored like this. Junior is clearly jealous that Tony prefers Dickie over him. Dickie, however, seems distracted and off. We later see him drinking vodka in his car, showing that he's developed something of a drinking problem in these remaining years. Later, the family meets for lunch. Christopher is there, and in this version, he isn't afraid of Tony, but actually wants to be near him. Christopher as a kid was never scared of Tony, so I think the whole he knew that Tony would kill him idea is stupid. Junior, still jealous and hurt, makes the varsity athlete comment to the girl cousins. I think it's fine to include the joke, and now in this version, we have context for why he makes it, and it also mirrors Tony's behavior of sniping at people when he was dealing with a problem. Dickie, however, defends Tony and makes a joke about Junior. Now there's a lot of ways we can go here, but one idea is that he could make a reference to Junior going down on his Gumar. This might be a little on the nose and too close to what happens in The Sopranos, but it obviously would make Junior very upset, especially during this time. Either way though, Tony loves Dickie even more for standing up for him. Dickie then goes to meet with DeMeo. DeMeo tells him that a crew from New England has stolen a shipment of drugs that they were going to sell. I know that in real life the Mafia was forbidden from openly selling drugs, but the DeMeo crew never seemed to have a problem with it. In the show, Tony doesn't care if Richie and Junior sell drugs as long as they don't do it along the garbage route. Junior also implies that he made money in the 50s with heroin. DeMeo tells Dickie to head up there and recover their supply. This was something that Tony referenced in Season 4, so we're actually going to see it happen here. Dickie then leaves for New England after saying goodbye to Tony. That night, Tony goes out with his friends, Jackie Aprile, Ralph, Artie Bucco, and Silvio, who in this version is the same age as Tony. They break into their high school to drink and vandalize the place. Again, this parallels with what AJ will later do. They get caught by the police though. In New England, Dickie hunts down the crew that stole their drugs. He single-handedly kills them all, showing his skill and why he was so respected. He then recovers the drugs. As he's leaving though, he looks at the heroin in his car and is tempted to start using it. We then cut back to New Jersey. The police bring Tony home, and his mother is furious. The police warn her that they have to inform the school. Dickie then brings the drugs back to DeMeo, who is impressed with him. He's given the job of delivering the drugs to the African Americans they work with for distributing. This turns out to be Harold, who doesn't recognize Dickie as the shooter, and they start working together. Tony then has a meeting with the principal and his mother. The principal warns him that if anything else happens, he'll be expelled. Now, Livia in the show always said that she was being called to the principal's office, so here we get to see an example of that. Meanwhile, there's an election for the mayor of Newark. The previous mayor was convicted of corruption. And while this is true from history, we're going to use the details I said earlier to imply that he took bribes from the mob. Again, giving it more of a connection to the characters. Now the race is on between Kenneth Gibson, the first black mayor of Newark, versus Imperiale. Now, in real life, Gibson was already mayor when Imperiale ran against him, but we'll make a slight change to make it more dramatic. Imperiale, of course, is incensed at the idea of a black man holding office. Harold meets with Maurice. Maurice is organizing black voting drives for Gibson, which is something we heard he did in the show. He believes politics is the way forward to equality. Harold, however, believes that only money and violence will ever give them power, and he cites the Italians as a prime example of this. Maurice reveals that he knows Harold has started using, and asks if that's also part of the plan. Later, Dickie meets with Livia, Johnny, and Junior. They're worried that Tony will get kicked out of school if he keeps up this behavior. Junior offers to talk to Tony, but he'll only listen to Dickie. Dickie then talks to Tony, and they both agree to stay out of trouble. Dickie then goes back home to Joanne. Now, Joanne is different than when we first started this film. She's drinking and she's bitter. Again, something we learned about in the show. She accuses Dickie of caring more about Tony than his own son. Again, connecting back to these themes of father issues that we saw throughout the show. He says that it's her fault that they can't have more kids. Again, paralleling the fight that Christopher and Adriana will later have. They get into a fight and Dickie storms out. Dickie then goes to meet with Harold and ends up getting high with him in the car, paralleling scenes that Christopher had of getting high in the car as well. Dickie lets it slip that he feels guilty about something that happened in the riots, and that's why he started using. He says that he needs to do something to relieve his conscience, and Harold begins to suspect that it was Dickie that killed his friend. Imperiale then contacts the DeMeos. He wants the mob's help intimidating black voters, and we can get some classic Sopranos threats, probably being led by Paulie and the rest of the crew as they threaten African Americans and try to get them not to vote. Again, we're trying to show a reason why Harold and the others would have such animosity against the gangsters. We'll also see some more rallies being led by Maurice and the pastor against this kind of harassment. Later, Dickie steals some stereos and gives them to Tony. Tony asks him what happened to staying out of trouble. Dickie says that it's fine because they're both good people. He says that they're soldiers, and they're just following codes. Dickie, of course, is just trying to make himself feel better about what he did, and this is going to be the start of Tony's hypocritical attitude and how he justifies his horrible actions in the series. In the original version, I didn't think that Dickie really made Tony who he was, which is what the marketing implied the movie was all about. Now, you might say that's just bullshit marketing, but the point remains we need to have a reason to explore this relationship between Tony and Dickie. Otherwise, there's no point to the film. In this way, we can see the profound impact that Dickie has on shaping Tony's morals and his sense of accountability. Harold then goes back to Maurice. They discuss what happened the night of the riots, and they realize that it was Dickie and their crew that shot their friend. Harold wants to retaliate, and he convinces Maurice to go along with it. Now, in the show, Maurice says that he renounced violence long ago, which implies that at some point he did use violence. We're gonna see that here. Tony and his friends then go out and steal some swag to sell. They're caught again, and this time Artie runs, too scared to face the consequences. This is why he was never with Tony's crew, despite apparently being the worst one out of the group. The police then bring Tony home. Now even Johnny Boy is pissed. but Tony says it doesn't matter because it's what Dickie would have done. Johnny Boy is now mad that Dickie is leading Tony astray. Later that night, the DeMeos go out partying. Johnny Boy starts to talk to Dickie about Tony when Harold and his crew attack. People are killed on both sides, and Dickie ends up saving Junior, temporarily ending the beef with them. And it also makes it all the more heartbreaking when Junior later does kill Dickie. Dickie takes out one of the shooters, and when he does, Harold realizes that it was him that killed his friend that night during the riots. Eventually, Harold and Maurice are forced to run off. When they're safe, Maurice throws his gun away, saying that he's done with violence. Harold, however, isn't satisfied. He still wants revenge, and now he knows his specific target, Dickie Moltisanti. End of Act 2. The Soprano crew then has a wake for their associate who died. They decide they need to hunt down the guy that attacked him. And at the funeral, Johnny Boy notices that Dickie is high. He roughs him up in the bathroom and warns him that there'll be consequences if he keeps using. Again, this mirrors how Tony dealt with Christopher. And Johnny Boy also tells him to stay away from his son. At the funeral, Junior ends up slipping on the staircase and Dickie laughs at him. This sets Junior off, but unlike the movie, it isn't just humiliation. We've also established at this point that it's partly about Junior feeling jealous about losing Tony. The crew later finds out that it was Harold that attacked them, and they order Dickie to take care of him, as they know he works with him on the drugs. He says he will the next day. Paulie then goes to meet with Imperiali in his office. They report on the harassment campaign, and Imperiali wants them to do more, as it looks like Gibson is going to win the election. Paulie agrees, and he also lets it slip that they're going to whack Harold. Paulie was always talking too much in this series, and here we can see that happen again. Zellman overhears this. We can give it the excuse that he's continuing to intern even after all these years, or working for him or something. And he goes to warn Maurice. Maurice then goes to meet with Harold, and he warns him that the mob is after him. Harold says it doesn't matter, as he's going to kill Dickie first, that very night. Maurice tells him that he is just as responsible as the mob for ruining their community. Harold sells drugs, which hurts their people. I think this is important to give more nuance to Harold as a character. And thanks to the political work that Maurice is doing, Newark is going to have their first black mayor. Harold respects what Maurice has done, but he still has to do things his way. He goes out to kill Dickie. Dickie then goes to the pork store to pick some things up. There he runs into DeMeo again. Now DeMeo can see that he's spiraling, and he warns him that his family is going to get hurt if he keeps this up. Dickie realizes that he needs to change, and plans to see Tony the next day to set him right. That night though, Harold goes to kill Dickie at his house. He waits for him in his car across the street, and he sees Dickie pull up. Dickie is carrying some TV trays out of his trunk, and Harold gets out of his car and heads towards him to kill him. Before he can shoot though, another hitman comes and shoots Dickie in the head. Harold is startled, and unsure of what to do, he flees. We later learn that it was Junior that ordered the hit. Hopefully at this point though, the conflict feels more fleshed out and more connected to the show. The family then gathers for Dickie's funeral. Junior spreads the rumor that it was a cop that killed Dickie on behalf of Jilly Ruffalo. This is where Tony gets the story from in the show, and it also brings us back full circle to the start of the movie. Junior did warn Dickie that his actions would get him killed one day. And as the movie ends and Tony looks down at his favorite uncle, he hears the words that Dickie left him with. We're soldiers. We follow codes. And this is going to be the mantra that leads Tony into going into the mob.
When I was a kid, guys like me were brought up to follow codes. It's business. We're soldiers. We follow codes. Orders.
We've actually given a reason why Dickie influenced Tony, and it directly leads into the show where Tony has the same philosophy. And that's my version of the Many Saints of Newark. I know it wasn't a perfect version by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think this version is more thematically connected and more connected to the show in general. But let me know what you guys thought of this version, and let me know of any changes you think that would make the movie better. Alright, look. You like the video, and at the same time, you tell yourself, this is the last Kino video I'm ever gonna watch. It's as simple as that. Tommy Smith, Abdallah Al-Amari, Russell, Sean, Graham, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Placenta Wan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, Konchak Chofel, Obsc Racing Media, Daz J-Kit, Conan Higgins, Elizabeth Ellis, Irish Nachos, Sharoz, Greg Penna, Stephen Lillard, Rex Lee, Virtua Fig, Sam Cedarlin, Sandy Wren, Legendary Matt 93, and Don Lucania.